Cool. Well, thank you, everybody. So my name's Rachel. I'm Chief Commercial Officer at an organisation called Beam, and we have a product called Magic Notes, which is an AI tool used in the public sector. I'm going to give a very, very brief intro to who we are and what that means to set the scene. And then I'm just going to talk a little bit about a project we have recently completed that was led by Nesta and their Centre for Collective Intelligence, which is the arm of Nesta that looks at bringing public insights into analysing and evaluating changes in the public sector. So I'm going to run through some high-level findings from the report, and I've included a link to the full report and can drop it in the chat as well for anyone who's interested in getting into the nitty-gritty, and I know their team would be very happy to chat to anyone as well. I guess firstly, just to give an intro to who we are and why we ended up here. Beam actually started with this person. So this is Tony. Tony was somebody who was homeless and he lived in London, but had been out of work for a long time and moving between homeless hostels. He was the very first person that Beam supported. So Beam started life as an organisation delivering casework support to people who were homeless, leaving prison, seeking asylum in the UK. And we did that by offering support, employment coaching, but also crowdfunding so that people could overcome the financial barriers in their lives. And Beam still does this today. We still have a big team of caseworkers who are sitting in the office just outside this room, supporting people to access jobs and homes and get stability back in their lives. But through all of our time, we kept facing the same challenges. So by 2024, we'd supported over 5,000 people to get a home and a job. But through that, we'd written 600,000 case notes manually. And what we realized as we started digging into things was that our team was spending 30–40% of their time on admin and typing things up rather than actually supporting the people that we were here to support. And we work very closely with government partners in that exercise, and it wasn't lost on us that this was a universal problem. And so we built a tool called Magic Notes, initially for our internal teams, and as I'll go on to explain, increasingly used by caseworkers in lots of other organisations. I won't belabor how it all works, but in a nutshell, it is an AI tool that can create compliant case notes. So it's built on top of existing LLM models, but it is structured in a way that is compliant for the context that you're operating in. So you can produce very bespoke outputs that comply with things like a Care Act assessment or an occupational therapy review. And you are building that with very, very tight guardrails around security for obvious reasons, but also around like the context that it's going to bring into that note so that you get accurate and fair responses. So this was the first tool that we built, and it's fair to say it's grown pretty quickly. So we've been working on this for about 18 months or so, and it's now used by about 70,000 frontline workers, more than 200 partners everywhere from the Orkney Islands to the Isle of Wight is a very common phrase here. So it's very flexible as a tool and is used by lots and lots of different frontline teams. It's also been evaluated. We've had more than 100 local authority teams independently evaluate the tool, as well as several academics and independent consultants who've either worked with our government partners independent of us or worked with us to do evaluations. And that's consistently found that the tool saves workers time. It's usually about 8 hours a week that people save on admin time just from using Magic Notes. It's like a whole day back. But perhaps more interestingly, and I certainly think more excitingly, enables workers to actually spend more time with the people that they are there to support and concentrate instead of scribbling in a notebook. And I know my mum worked in child protection her whole career, and she found in that space in particular, the pressure to keep very accurate notes for very good reason often creates a disconnect between you and your the person that you're actually working with and the family you're trying to support. But we were missing something like pretty important, right? Which is, what does the public and what do people who are accessing social care themselves actually think about the tool? So we had some insight into this, like via our partners, where often our pilots and evaluations would involve surveying people who had been accessing social care and how they felt about that as part of their care. And we obviously asked the social workers themselves how they thought people might feel about Magic Notes and how it had gone down in their sessions. But we didn't have an independent view of it. And so Nesta are an organisation we've worked with previously, and they had some potential funding to do a more deliberate exercise looking at the public's attitude towards AI services in public sector. And so we partnered with them on a bid. So it's completely Nesta's work and we take no credit for it. But we agreed to basically put Magic Notes through the process as part of their bid. We were one of 2 tools that went through the process. So the other one you can read about online is something called Consult, which is a product that was built by the IAI team, who are the incubator in DSIT, for those of you who don't know them. So it's built in-house in government. So we were the second tool to go through this process, and hopefully one of many more. It was a fascinating thing to see happen. And I think the results potentially speak to the kinds of insights you could get through public consultation if done in a certainly more time and labour intensive way, but also a more thoughtful way. So I'm going to talk through a few high level findings. So firstly, in terms of like context that the Nesta team started with, so around 40% of the UK public think that AI is dangerous and should not be used in the public sector at all. And just shy of 30% feel that AI is transformative and should be widely adopted in the public sector. So the world is pretty split, I guess, is where you start from. 23% trust that public sector organisations can use AI responsibly. So of all those people who think it's transformative, not all of them think the public sector could make it transformative. And so they were starting this process with that backdrop of how the public already feel about AI. But they also knew that like the specific context like really matters, and people, when they're asked like how would we feel about AI being used in different settings, we all have like potentially instinctive and potentially kind of grounded thoughts on whether it would be appropriate in different settings. And you can see here that people are very, very supportive in healthcare settings, for example, and maybe less supportive in other settings where you might feel like the human is a more important aspect of the work. And so Nesta basically approached the AI deliberation process by giving people a lot more context on the situations that AI was being used in and how it was being used, to give them the opportunity to give better insights. So they called it the AI social readiness assessment process, which doesn't quite roll off the tongue, actually, when you have to say it out quite a lot. But it does capture very nicely what they were trying to do, which is how ready are the public for this tool to be used in this context in this way. And they went through a process whereby they brought together focus groups that included cross-sections of the general public, as well as booster samples of people who were currently accessing social care, primarily adult social care residents. And they got them together for quite long focus group sessions, where they went through the stages of understanding what the tool was actually doing and the mitigations in process. So this is a very high level view of how it worked. We worked with Nesta to give them lots of information. So we gave them access to all of our security documentation, how the tool actually works in the background, information on evaluations we've done so far, the risk assessments we've done, and let them kind of have that on hand for the focus groups. Then they brought together groups, so 144 participants in total, and took them through a process whereby they started with the context, so explaining what does social care really look like in this example, then thinking about like what does Magic Notes do, what are the risks, what are the mitigations, and therefore how do we feel about it in the round. And they took all of that data and turned it into what they call a label, which is basically summarizing how comfortable people feel. But I think most importantly, what should people who are considering commissioning a service like ours and people like us think about in terms of reducing potential risk in the future. So the process, I won't go into it now because we don't have time, but it's really, really well done. Everybody sits in the room and has these kind of iPads that have videos that explain some quite complicated technical concepts, some of which people will have come across before and some people in the group won't know anything about, in layman's terms, that enables people to really understand like what is actually happening. And then they will do a kind of mission deep dive, as they call it, into how the tool is working, and then look at the trade-offs. And they don't shy away from the fact that everything that we do probably has some benefits, and there are also going to be some drawbacks, and trying to weigh up what are the real risks, what are the real benefits, and deliberate as a group as to how they then felt. And then they'd vote individually on whether they felt like the tool was a good thing or not. So in terms of the Magic Notes findings, again, there's like a wealth of data if you're curious on Nesta's website and in the report on this. But a few things I think are really interesting. Firstly, just 13% of people were satisfied with the current social care process. And I think like a couple of these quotes, I guess, really bring it to life that like something does need to be done in this space. And there is real crisis in a lot of social care service. And that context, I think, like laid the groundwork for a lot of how people then thought about how you should then respond. Overall, 83% of the public felt positive about social workers using Magic Notes specifically, with about 10% feeling negative and thinking that it shouldn't be used in social care at all. And 74% agreed that the benefits outweighed the risks. And again, there's plenty to dig into on this, but they were asked questions like, I'm comfortable with the level of risk associated with this tool, or I value the benefits. And here again, I think you can really start to get into some interesting nuance, and the quotes and the richness of the information we got back was fantastic, because even on just those top two, you can see that people can value the benefits of something and think that's a good thing, but still think the risks like outweigh the benefits and not want it. And for us, being able to like dig into what those risks were, what mitigations we might be able to put in place to increase confidence and security has been really, really helpful. People were most concerned about the risk of inaccuracy from transcription errors or over-reliance by social workers in future. So the risk that people will just take what they're given and not check it or edit it in future. You can see on the left of the screen here the other kind of factors. These were standardized factors that Nesta assessed people's perceptions of throughout the process. And you can see exactly the same breakdown for Consult. And their hope is that they will commission the same process for other tools in future. And then you'll be able to see, not quite apples to apples, obviously, but be able to see how people feel about different tools against these same metrics, which should be really interesting. And you can also there see like the concerns about an individual tool versus AI in general. And again, I think this is really helpful because often like AI is a very big space and it means lots and lots of different things. And for commissioners thinking about like, should this tool be used in this setting, being able to think about this tool or this particular application of AI versus AI in general, it's a very useful thing, I think, for people trying to put it all into practice. And then obviously there were a bunch of key takeaways. So I thought it'd be worth giving a whistle stop on the things that really matter to us. So firstly, like a big bucket around like operational implementation, like a lot of this stuff can feel quite theoretical, but at Beam we spend a lot of time on the ground. mainly driven by the fact that this obviously came from our frontline teams, but we really believe that you only get the benefits if you actually implement it well. But obviously that implementation needs to be done carefully. So there was a strong emphasis from the public on wanting oversight, and in particular spot checking. So there were already lots of systems of oversight in social care in particular, but how are we doing dip tests basically into different cases to make sure that things are accurate, that social workers are checking their work and making necessary changes. Secondly, the AI is moving incredibly quickly, and therefore you can't just kind of onboard someone once and then let them kind of crack on. So the need for investment in ongoing training would be critical. And then something we think about a lot, which is around consent, and what protocols you have in place for when people don't consent, but also importantly in this context, when they might not be able to consent. The second piece around ongoing evaluation, this was a brilliant exercise for us, but it definitely doesn't end at this point. A lot of interest in looking at what the long-term impact is. So both on quality of service and whether this could improve or not the quality of service people are accessing, but also the long-term impact on efficiency. How you continually think about seeking user and resident feedback. This was obviously a very intensive process, which was very helpful, but not something we can do kind of every month. So what are those processes for getting continual feedback? And then, very timely for this conversation, I suppose, thinking about how we build communities of practice. And in particular, for us, we do a lot to kind of try and connect different local authorities to share their insights on things that we're not going to be able to help them with, but they can help each other with, and investing in that space. And then lastly, there are obviously product suggestions. I've kind of bucketed them into two. The first is around kind of continual testing for accuracy and bias. So we do quite a bit in this space, as you can imagine, to test our models, test the other kind of guardrails and elements of the tech stack that we have to control accuracy, but also to make sure that the information you're pulling in doesn't introduce bias into any of the summaries that you're producing. And then interestingly, there was a lot of emphasis from people who took part in, well, what could you do with this that's more than just improving efficiency? And are there trends that you could identify to actually improve care? And are there things that social workers are doing in some settings that could be shared with other social care workers to help us improve the outcomes for different people? So that is an area that needs a lot of thought. It is something we're quite interested in doing, but as Louis was covering, it's not without its own challenges to do it well. And then very lastly, I thought this was quite interesting, that the process itself shifts attitudes to AI and public services. And you can see here the top bar is before the process and the bottom bar is after. And people's comfort with AI being used in public services kind of increased throughout the process. And the qualitative feedback on this was around obviously aspects of the tool itself, and the consult process had exactly the same kind of output. But I think moreover, just seeing how public sector organisations are actually thinking through the risks and the mitigations they're putting in place gave people a lot more confidence that it's being considered thoughtfully, when maybe they might not have had that impression previously. Although, as you can also see, people were not completely convinced. That red bar definitely didn't go all the way down to 0, but does show, I think, what a bit of context can bring to the table, so people can make more informed decisions. Oh no, sorry, I said last one. There was one other snippet I thought everyone here might be interested in, which is people were asked what was more important. Is it more important to have public support or more important to save money? And more people, by quite a long stretch, felt that public support is more important than saving money in public services, which might be interesting for any budding politicians amongst us to think about. That's it. That's my whistle-stop tour of the process. Somebody smarter than me did this slide a little while ago, and I'm just assuming it still works, but I will put the link to the report into the chat if anyone does want to have a read of it, and happy to take any questions if anybody has any.